We are finishing up our class in creating community in the church and looking at what it is to have a congregation working together and what kind of culture are we striving for here in this congregation. What responsibilities do we have towards God, to our brothers and sisters, to our neighbors in order to create this community here. And as we close this out, we're going to be looking at some responsibilities we have. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you have maybe a group of kids or on a bus or somewhere or a classroom nowadays sometimes, and there's like no authority. There's no authority in the room. Nobody's going to get in trouble. Nobody's going to be held accountable for anything. And usually what happens in that scenario when nobody's held accountable? This isn't just with kids, obviously. This is with everybody, but when there's no accountability, what happens? Chaos. You can do whatever you want. So we'll be talking a little bit about that, but we're looking at it kind of from a different way, answering this question. I got to turn this on before it works. Answering this question that we see here in Genesis. So we're going all the way back to Genesis to bring us all the way forward to today. You guys know the story of Cain and Abel. You've heard that story before. You know those events that happened. Spelled with a C, not with a K. Cain's like holding his Bible up over there. So that's a different Cain. So we know the story of Cain and Abel. All right, there was a jealousy involved, and Cain's offer wasn't accepted. And how did Cain feel like it was the best way of solving this issue? What was the best way for him to solve the issue with his brother? He just got rid of him, right? We just Jimmy Hoffied him. And got rid of him. That's just the best way of handling the situation, is get rid of the person. Obviously not. That's not recommended. And so the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" Now, if you've ever dealt with kids, sometimes you go to people and you ask a question you already know the answer to. Maybe as a child you've been on the receiving end of this, where parents ask you a question and you're wondering in that moment, do they already know? Right, there's repercussions of how you respond, right? And so in this case, Cain thought he had it all under control, right? Had it all under control. "Where's Abel, your brother?" And he said, "I don't know." Like this kind of he's saying this to God. I believe the word that we would use is snarky, is the appropriate word here. Am I my brother's keeper? You can hear the sass, right? And then God said, "What have you done?" Because he obviously knows the answer. But here's the question: am I my brother's keeper? When it comes to what my brother's doing or not doing, am I my brother's keeper? Do I have a responsibility to my brother or sister in this community that we have? And the Bible would, just to skip ahead, spoiler alert, yes, we do have a responsibility, and we're gonna get to that point. But there's a process and something that we need to recognize as we get there. And so I want us to realize first our place in this relationship. Do I personally have a responsibility to my brother? Am I? Yeah, and we will say emphatically yes. So Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 through 10 says something to this effect, and we'll hit on this a couple of times tonight. But if you look over in Galatians chapter 6, "Brethren, even if anyone is caught in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness, each one looking to yourself, so that you too will not be tempted." Verse 2, "Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." So in short, Paul is saying that yes, I have a responsibility to my brother to help them correct something that is currently wrong or not correct in their life. And so we need to make sure that we are careful. Verse 3 and 4, make sure that we don't puff ourselves up. All right, I believe this is if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing in light of what God has done for us. Right? In light of all that God has done for us, we are nothing. We are but servants. We cannot get to a situation where we think we are something and forget how much has been forgiven of us. But we must each examine his own work. Verse 5, each one will bear his own load. So there is a responsibility that we have towards others, and there's a responsibility I have towards myself. My own load, my own burdens that I'm supposed to be bearing, the things that I'm supposed to be dealing with. Look down in verse 8. For the one who sows to his own flesh will reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. There's an important principle here in dealing with individuals, dealing with just our own lives. This law of sowing and reaping. Have you ever planted seeds that were labeled one thing and expected something else? Can you do that? I'm going to sow these seeds, but I want something completely different to grow. That doesn't work. What do we say about youth? What do youth sow? We don't say this so much anymore, but what do we used to say? Sow their wild oats. What are you going to get when you sow wild oats? More wild oats. So the idea that, I'll just do this in my youth and there won't be any repercussions later is not founded on anything scientific. It's not founded on anything logical. And so here, in this case, if I'm sowing for the flesh, now, there is one aspect where we do need to prepare for just physical responsibilities in life. I need to take care of my children. I need to take care of my family. That's my responsibility. Those are physical things that I must provide for my family. But if I'm only providing for the flesh, if I'm only providing and giving no room for the spiritual side of things, what am I sowing and what will I reap? Do you see what I'm saying? See how that will play out in the cycle of a family, in the cycle of our spiritual lives? If I'm only providing for myself physically, and I'm an atlas as far as a physical physique, hypothetically, when I talk about myself. But spiritually, I'm Pee Wee Herman, right? Some of you might not even know who that is, but you understand what I'm saying. Where are we? Where are we? Do you see what? So a law of sowing and reaping, yes, there are certain responsibilities, physical responsibilities we have that we need to take care of, but if we're only focused on those things and we're not focused on the spiritual side of things, spiritual responsibilities towards one another, our spiritual responsibilities to raising a family, to my responsibilities within a congregation, those are all things that I must be sowing as well. So this is interesting. This is put here kind of in the context. Let us not lose heart in doing good, because people will take advantage of you, right? That's the Greek alternate reading here. Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not grow weary. Again, understanding that if I'm continuing to do good, to do what I'm supposed to do, good will come of it in the end. And we may not see it now. We may not see those things now. Much like if you plant an oak tree, right? You go through Georgia and you see all these manufactured forests, right? They're all planted in forests. The adage is man grows pine, God grows hardwoods, God grows oaks, because man's not going to be around long enough, a certain individual to see those things grow. And so in like manner, there are things that we do that are right things to do that maybe in our lives we won't see the fruits of that labor, but we do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. And it's a law of sowing and reaping. And it's something that we need to do for one another. It's an investment that we have in one another. And so then, verse 10, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to whom? Especially who we're supposed to be watching out for? Our brethren, especially towards the household of faith. And so we see that very, very early on that, yes, I have a responsibility, but we see our part in that relationship. It works because it's in a relationship. It works when we've put in the time to build these relationships. That's when it works, when I can go and talk to somebody. If you ever had somebody come and talk to you that had never spoken to you before, but all of a sudden they want to correct you on a thing, maybe it doesn't go over as well as somebody that you know is coming to you because they care. In both cases, they have a responsibility, but it always is nice to know that the person that's saying it, they care first. They're vested in you already. Romans chapter 14, verse 7, no one lives for themselves or dies for themselves, but we are the Lord's, what it says in verse 8. And that is that I can't be just separate from, I'm going to be a Christian, I'm going to be part of God's body, and I'm just going to be over here doing my own thing. You do you. Right? You can't do that inside the construct of the family, a household of God that God has set up. You can't do, well, you do you and I'll do me, and we'll worship on Sundays and it'll be fine. That's not how it works. We don't live to ourselves, we don't die to ourselves. We have a responsibility towards one another. And look over at 1 Corinthians chapter 12. So how is the body composed according to this passage? Or how do we get to be a part of the body? In this passage, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 12 and 13. 12 through 14. What's that? We're baptized into it. We're all as one, as it was mentioned in our discussion, our devotional time this evening. We're baptized into one body. It doesn't matter where our background, verse 13, but the body is not one member, but many. So we are this culmination of things, of individuals being brought together. Skipping down to verse 25, so that there is no division, and this is what we need to look at, but that the members have the same care for one another, and if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it, and if one member is honored, then all the members rejoice with it. And so we see this unity, but to the effect that what good happens to one or what bad happens to one, it affects all of us. We are in sync with these things that happen. We are sympathetic. We are empathetic. We rejoice. We're not jealous when good things happen to our brothers and sisters. We rejoice with them in these things. And this is a healthy community. This is a healthy scenario when these things are in place. And I'm a part of that. That's me. I'm involved in this unity in this group. So am I? Yes, I am in this group. I need to realize our place in this relationship when we start talking about being our brother's keeper. Let's look and talk about another, talking about my brother, recognition that this relationship or this exists. There is this thing here. In Genesis chapter 13, just shortly after, God had called Abraham out of his homeland, God blessed Abraham and blessed those who blessed him and cursed those who cursed him. So much so that all his herds began to multiply, and then also those of Lot. Do you remember what happened? They were all kind of traveling together, this one big happy band, and then it got to what point? Do you remember what's going on here in Genesis chapter 13? The servants were fighting. So imagine if you have all these goats and sheep and orangutans, all these animals or whatever you have, and you have so many of them that one place doesn't have enough resources for the both of you, right? It's a classic Western kind of concept. This valley isn't big enough for the both of us, so we can't do this. And so the herdsmen, the people that were taking care of their flocks, were fighting, what happens with strife and fighting generally in a line of command? Where does it go? So it goes up, right? It goes up the chain of command, and they're hearing about it, which would automatically put Abraham and Lot at odds because of the resources that are going on. What does Abraham in his wisdom say to Lot concerning their relationship? What's that? Yes. Exactly. And so Abraham said to Lot in verse 8, "So please let there be no strife between you and me, or between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren." We are brethren. And this highlights the concept that we need to recognize that we are brethren. We are brothers and sisters. We just got done talking about in the high school class about how we regard one another in the church and how we look at one another in the church. And Paul talks about, don't rebuke an elder, and the older as mothers, or you're talking to the younger and looking at the sisters, as the other younger sisters, as sisters in the church, in all purity, is what he says there. And so there is this familiar kind of relationship, this household family relationship. And because of that, we need to be in community. We need to be in unity with one another, not at strife. And in this case, it could have been a situation where they were at odds because of physical things, which goes against what we're trying to build here as a family of God. We should not be at odds because of physical, earthly things. And so Abraham chooses the wise path and allows him to go the way he needs to go. And then in similar fashion, we need to use this as an example for ourselves. Look over in Matthew chapter 23. Matthew 23. So we're talking about some individuals, and individuals like to elevate themselves. And this is something we need to kind of get out in the open here. Here's talking about these that are supposed to be the teachers of that time, the Pharisees. They love the place of honor at banquets and chief seats and synagogues and respectful greetings in marketplaces, being called rabbi by men. But do not be called rabbi, for one is your teacher, and you are all brothers. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, and he who is in heaven. Do not be called leaders, for one is your leader, that is Christ. But the greatest among you shall be your servant. And whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. As we come together as a family, we use brother as a title a lot of times, or if we don't remember somebody's name, brother or sister, right? That's helpful. I'm showing you too much. Anyway, so we do that from time to time. But it's more than just a title, it's a relationship. We've moved it over into like this brother so-and-so, and we move it into some sort of title thing, but it's a relationship that we're talking about here. We are brothers. We are brethren in a relationship. And nobody needs to be in any kind of elevated position in any way. We respect one another mutually, and we get there in just a moment. And looking at some other passages, we respect one another mutually and take care of one another, but nobody is higher, elevated in any other position, nor would we call anybody by another name that would elevate them in any way, because we are brethren and we work together in that capacity. In Matthew chapter 12, when Jesus was talking about, it was brought to his attention that his family was there, Jesus kind of takes this opportunity to teach something else about us as a family. So while he was still speaking, in verse 46 of Matthew 12, while he was still speaking to the crowds, behold, his mother and brothers were standing beside him, seeking to speak to him. Someone said to him, behold, your mother and your brothers are standing outside, seeking to speak to you. But Jesus answered to the one who was telling him and said, who is my mother and who are my brothers? And stretching out his hand towards the disciples, he said, behold, my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father who is in heaven, he is my brother and my sister and my mother. Now, if you were to put yourself in the family's position of Jesus, what would you think in that moment? Especially if you were Jesus' mother in that moment. What would you be thinking? What could possibly be derived from Jesus' comment? Yes, that's some sort of song we've sung recently, right? So there is that idea that it seems like he's separating himself, or maybe he thinks he's adopted, or whatever. So he's separating himself from the family. Maybe they could think that. Yes.
You gotta back up and remember that at this point, his brothers were telling people he was crazy, and we don't know why they showed up. They could have showed up to try to shut him down,
Yep.
to try to make him be quiet. There's a lot that we don't know that's going on. But the
Yes.
truth remains that the family relationship is the relationship that he was building in the kingdom that he was bringing in.
Yes, so that's an excellent point in that Jesus' family wasn't super excited about what he was saying and the things that he was doing and trying to hush him up. It's causing trouble for them. Possibly there's more to this than what was just said here. But the end result is the same in that, that we're all part of this kingdom principle. We're part of this family. But what's interesting are those who do the will of not just anybody. For whoever does the will of my Father who is in heaven, he is my brother and my sister and my mother. And sometimes this word gets used kind of like just in all Christendom. We're all brothers. We all worship the same God. It's not exactly what this is saying. Those who do the will of God, yes, we are brethren. We can do the high five, 80s high five, right? But those who are not doing the will of God are not necessarily in that same family vein. So we need to be aware of that. We are brethren because we are doing the same thing and following the will of God. And lastly, in this point, let's look at Romans 12. We've kind of looked at this before, so we won't spend a ton of time here, but Romans chapter 12. Let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted, or as we've said before, is literally saying outdo one another in showing honor and brotherly love. Give preference to one another in honor, not lagging behind in diligence, fervent in the spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, persevering in tribulation, devoted to prayer, contributing to the needs of the saints, and practicing hospitality. Do you see this? I recognize where I am in this relationship. I recognize that there's a relationship, and because I've done that, there's this responsibility I have towards my brethren and being devoted to one another, that my love that is shown to them isn't in word only, right? Not like James talks about, go be warm and filled, but it's not by hypocrisy. That is not in word only, but that we do those things to be devoted to one another. We're outdoing one another and showing honor to one another, right? We talked about this before in other classes, but it comes up here in that if I'm my brother's keeper and I recognize this relationship, then there's something on my part that I need to do and that all of us need to do in that relationship, in showing honor to one another and hospitality and practicing these things, contributing to the needs of the saints. And in that time frame, we talked about how there were many needs that were being seen to. There were gifts, or there were monies that were collected for the starving saints in Jerusalem. Different things were happening around the Mediterranean Sea at the time, and things that were being done for one another. Funds that were being sent to other locations so that people could keep preaching and teaching in different areas. So there's a lot that they were doing to see to the needs of one another, and many different things as you read through Acts. I would actually, if you wanted a subject to study, you were sitting around and I don't know what I want to study, take the book of Acts. Take the book of Acts. Read through it and write down all the things that the church was said that they were doing in the book. What was the church doing in the book of Acts? Just write it down. Read through every chapter. What was the church doing? What were church members doing in the first century? And then let's see if we can copy some of those things and see what was happening. So that's homework. That's extra. You are welcome. So let's look at lastly here. Am I my brother's keeper? What does it mean to be a keeper? We're not talking about a goalie necessarily. A keeper is this same word is translated hedge or bodyguard or watchman. It's another way the same word is translated in the Old Testament in these different ways. So if I am there as a hedge around my brother, if I'm there to be a bodyguard, we can understand those principles. Maybe you've had family, that you've had siblings that you've helped to guard them from the neighborhood bully or whatever it is. Sometimes guard them from themselves is what happens. But when we talk about the watchman, if you go over to Ezekiel chapter 33, what does God say about what a watchman is? What is a watchman? Do you remember? What is a watchman? What's their responsibility? What's that? There's a stand guard, there's a night watchman idea, and that's something that was carried over into medieval times. Any fortified city and things like that, there would be a night watchman that would go around and make sure the city was okay, that they weren't under siege all of a sudden, that there were no dangers approaching during the night, kind of keeping an eye out on things. And so here's the responsibility of the watchman in beginning in verse 5. He heard a sound of a trumpet, and he did not take warning. And talking about the watchman, his blood will be on himself. But had he taken warning, he would have delivered himself. This is that the watchman blew the trumpet in the night to warn them about what's happening, and he didn't take heed to the warning. He didn't do anything. Then, his blood, his death is on his own hands. It's on his own hands. But if the watchman sees the sword coming, sees danger coming, does not blow the trumpet, and the people are not warned, and a sword comes and takes a person from them, he is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood I will require from the watchman's hand. So in the end, the individual who's warned, in this case, the concept of being taken away in his iniquity, taken away in captivity because of what he was done. But the watchman said nothing. It's that individual's still their responsibility to be aware of what God's expecting of them. But the watchman should have said something. The watchman should have said something. And he said, it is I will require his blood at your hand. That's accounted to the watchman. Now, we bring this into the construct of us as a family of God, and I see a brother that is going astray. And I say nothing, and I do nothing. It is that brother's responsibility. They have to bear their own burdens. It is their responsibility, yes. I say nothing, and I'm a watchman. I'm supposed to be helping my brother. Then it may be on me too if I've done nothing to help them. And we'll look at some of these passages. As we looked at Galatians chapter 6, verse 1, what did we see there in Galatians chapter 6, verse 1 concerning warning those? Yes, ma'am.
On the other side of the coin, if somebody corrects us, we've got to have a good attitude about it because they're just doing what the Bible says.
Exactly. I don't know if you all heard that or not, but if somebody comes to me and wishes to say, hey, maybe we should talk about something, and they bring this up, we should look at it in a very different way. And we're gonna get there in just a second, but we need to recognize why they're doing it. Not only it's their responsibility, as you said, they're doing what God has asked them to do, and that's something. And as we look in Galatians chapter 6, ye who are spiritual, as the King James would say, restore such a one in a spirit of meekness. Right? Being watchful for yourself. Not in a spirit of, I got you. Right? Not in the spirit of, I'm going to tell mom and dad. Right? Not in that kind of spirit, but in a spirit that I want what's best for my brother and sister. Yes, not from a place of superiority, which is kind of what we were going for earlier, and that nobody's higher than anybody. We are brethren, and we have that responsibility towards one another. I'm not coming to speak down to you about a thing. I'm here, the way the Greek talks about encouragement is to bring alongside, is what the actual Greek means, to bring alongside, or the word to edify, to build somebody up, is quite different than just speaking down to them. That's not at all what we're supposed to be doing. And so we need to make sure that we are able to receive that. That's where humility works on both sides, as you were saying. On both sides of that scenario, humility needs to be there on both sides. Yep.
Sometimes we get so caught up in what's going on in our earthly relationships, even in the church.
Mm-hmm.
She said this to me, or I need to fix that, or I should go and talk to that person about whatever this relationship is, that we forget that at the bottom of it, what we're trying to do is work on that heavenly relationship. We're trying to all get to heaven together.
Yes.
And sometimes we get in our own way.
Yes. If we're concerned so much about just repeating what was said, concerned about going and talking to somebody or making sure we're saying these things, that in the end, we're trying to get to heaven together. In the end, their goal is for all of us to go together. It's not necessarily about just correcting somebody, but striving together in the same way. And as we look at these things, there's some certain motivations, and kind of we're going to look at this here, looking at these two passages together. What does 1 John chapter 4, verse 20 say? Remember, we've looked at this before. If you haven't memorized it yet, it'll be on a test. Just kidding. What does 1 John chapter 4, verse 20 say? What's that? Yes. So if anyone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. Because you can't do both. Right? You can't do both. For one who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has seen. Now, take this over to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 6. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 6 isn't in the context of loving my brother, but it is in the context of what love does. What does love do, according to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 6? What's that? Discipline. God disciplines those whom he loves. We discipline our children because we love them. Not because we want to be mean, not because we are embarrassed, not because they made me angry. We do it because, well, maybe they made me angry in the moment, but we do it because we love them and we want them to be better. Right? We want them to be disciplined and learn by those things. Now put those two beside each other. If I love God and hate my brother, I love God, could I hate my brother by not loving him enough to say what I'm supposed to say? Not loving them enough to bring something up because it's uncomfortable. It's to be really honest, it's uncomfortable to go to somebody and say, maybe this, I saw this, and maybe this was you, or this happened, or you said this thing, and it made me feel this way. It's awkward in the moment, right? I understand that. But how much more awkward will it be in eternity? I mean, put these things in perspective. It's uncomfortable in the moment, but it might be really, really uncomfortable later on. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Correct. Yes, our elders, as wise as they are, they don't know all things. Right? They don't know what everybody's doing. Right? And it's their responsibility to watch over us, and they have a great responsibility, especially with some of you guys. But anyway, but if we have this relationship, that was in jest, we're brothers, we can talk like this, okay. If we have this relationship where we care for one another, then I will say the things before it needs to go to an elder, right? Before it needs to get that far, we can help one another grow and learn because we love each other. And that's the origin, right? If I can understand that if somebody's coming to me, they know it's awkward, it's hard for them to say this, but they love me. If I know that somebody's coming to me and I see it because they love me and they want what's best for me, and I know that they are wanting what's best for me, can I take it differently than if, they're just trying to create a problem, right? Or they just think they're better than me? Who's saying that? Who says that? Who puts that in your minds that sows doubt about the love of your brother? Who does that? Satan. Those are worldly constructs. God has said, when a brother comes to you, it's because they love you. It's because I told them to come and talk to you. And it's because they care about your soul. That's what God says. And if we take it any other way, then we're allowing worldly concepts to get in the way of our relationship. We don't have time to go into a lot of what's going on in 2 Thessalonians, but there's a lot there as well about relationships. I'll just go ahead and put these up here, these other passages here about our responsibilities towards one another. These start talking about going to a brother, and if they don't listen, if they're causing division, don't associate with them anymore. Don't even eat with them anymore. That works if there's a relationship, and that works if we do it. Because what we've done is we've separated them from that relationship and said, you're different now. You're not living like you're supposed to. We've talked to you about this. You're not living like you're supposed to, and you've separated yourself, and we have to stand away from. We love you. We admonish you as your brother. You're not an enemy. We admonish you as a brother, but we have to step away from you right now because God said I'm supposed to. And God has built that into our community, into our body, to help one another to come back. And we've seen it work. We've seen it work. It doesn't always work, but it doesn't work. Yep, it works, right? And we do it because we love, right? So it works. But it works because they know that there's a relationship that's now no longer different. And so what I want to finish with, just a couple questions. Here's what we've been talking about, our one another responsibilities that kind of help build this community, this relationship that we have in Christ. And we went over these things. But we've talked about these responsibilities towards God, towards neighbor, to brothers and sisters, towards ourselves. And we can only change self. I can't change somebody else, but I can do what's right because I know it's the right thing to do. But I want to ask you to answer this question, and this is for you. This is your take home on this as we finish this class. God asked Cain, "What have you done?" When he said that comment, he asked the question, "What have you done?" And I want to ask the question, "What will you do?" What will you do differently now? After we've studied this for so long, are there things that we need to do differently? Are there practices that I need to change? Are there conversations I need to have? Is there a different attitude I need to have with my brothers and sisters? And recognizing this family relationship we have, this family dynamic, are there things that I need to do outside of these walls, that I need to do more to build relationships with my brothers and sisters here and outdo showing honor to them? This is for you to answer. It's something only you can do. But this is what I want to close with. What will you do going forward now that we've studied this? Are you going to do so? Will it be just an intellectual exercise, or will it be something that you take to heart and it does something for us to change and continue to build bigger our relationships we have here? Thank you very much for your time in class tonight.